Ogres, my lord, and Knoblars. And it's actually not all of the Ogres, but Creative Assembly has provided me this footage showcasing a slice of the Ogre Kingdom's roster. A full roster reveal will be coming later on, so don't you worry your little soul about that. For today, we're just going to be taking a look at some of these units. Keep in mind, these stats are not final. Things are subject to change, obviously, before release, but we can still compare these units to some existing units in Warhammer 2 to get a feel for what their intended role will be. Starting with the humble Knoblars, they are basically literally just goblins, except slightly worse. They have no shield, 5 less leadership, they are slightly faster, but less melee attack, same melee defense, slightly less weapon strength and charge, so literally just goblins, but like 5% worse. So my guess is then they would also be slightly cheaper than goblins, coming in maybe like 200, 250 points, hard to say, but there you go. A lot of people were worried we wouldn't get Knoblar chaff for Ogre Kingdoms, but here you go, they're here. I think they're going to be very important for Ogre Kingdoms given that their kind of roster construction. But let's move on. We do have another Knoblar unit here. This is actually a Knoblar ranged unit. They're Knoblar trappers. It's literally just Knoblars with a ranged attack. I think they pick up some javelins. They've got 10 javelins to throw. They also have some cool pelts on their head. They also have Vanguard, actually, if that's what you want. Stock, and they also have this activatable ability here, Knoblar Traps. One-time use, does a little bit of damage, and also gives minus speed, and charge bonus. So I don't know if the damage component will remain. It is only one-time use, but still, the fact that you get a little bit of free damage out of these guys is awesome. Depending on their cost, they certainly do have specialist stuff going on between the Vanguard, the Stock, and this Knoblar Traps. They could be northward of like 400 points, possibly. I'm not really sure of that, given that they're also an expendable unit, but definitely looks like an awesome support utility type unit for the Ogres to have access to, be able to debuff some speed so they can't get away from your hungry boys. Yeah, just an awesome unit. Very excited for Knoblar Trappers. They're having a grand old time too. Ogre Bulls are the unit we currently have in game that's just called Ogres. Interesting to note that they get more overall weapon strength, but it's non-primary AP now. Other than that, their stats are basically the same. There's been some fine-tuning in terms of balance, but overall, very much what we currently have in game. The main difference being, as I mentioned, the switch from primary AP to non-AP. Something else to note, Wall Breaker is a new trait being added in Game 3 where units can just straight up attack walls. Currently, I think only Warp Grinders have this ability in Game 2, but in Game 3 a lot of units will be able to just directly smash into the walls, so that's awesome. A lot of Ogre units specifically will, and Ogre Charge, sort of the Ogres, one of their army abilities here. When attacking braced defenders, this unit only loses half of its charge bonus, so you still don't probably want to be charging headlong into low tier spears. Probably won't be a cost-effective engagement for you, but you can charge into those braced units and still deal a good amount of damage on the charge. Next up, we've got Gorgers. Man, these are some ugly boys, must be said. Very low model count, which is odd. Only 8 models, even on Ultra unit settings, but they've got a lot of interesting stuff going here. I've got Morngulls as a comparison because they're kind of another, like, weirdly squishy, same weapon strength and anti-infantry. You know, they've got Vanguard, both of them. The Gorgers are unbreakable, it must be said, whereas Morngulls, they have hunger and they're undead, which means basically they're unbreakable because the hunger counteracts their crumbling to a pretty great degree, but they're still fairly squishy. Ogres do have more melee attack, but only 8 models with that low of a weapon strength is interesting. As we'll see though, they do have a specific Gorgers tag that allows them to synergize with some specific abilities on Scag the Slaughter, the legendary lord that we've got here, as you'll see in just a moment. They also get Frenzy, which means that their stats you see here on their base card aren't exactly what they'll get. I mean, given that they're unbreakable and Frenzy like Flagellants, this will just be a permanent stat increase, right, of +8 melee attack, an additional 10% armor piercing and base weapon damage, so they'll go up to, what, 110 weapon strength then, an additional 4 charge on there. Pretty impressive stats, honestly, but interesting unit. Definitely want to see them in action. They do have quite a bit of HP, too, per model, but lower HP overall than the Morngulls. Maneaters, great weapons. Again, we've seen this unit before. They're slightly balance tweaked from the iteration that we have in Total War Warhammer 2, but really not too much else to talk about here. Unlike the Leadlchers, this is a unit that I personally was looking forward to. I mean, just look, it's ogres holding literal cannons in their hands. What's not to love about that? And it will give the Ushabti Greatbow now another sort of unit in its class, that long-ranged monstrous infantry. They have pretty comfortable shooting attacks. It does seem like Ushabti Greatbows have a little bit better range, a little bit better damage, more ammunition as well, but the Leadlchers, let's see, non-armor piercing weapon damage, they have okay melee stats, they're not amazing. These guys might be cheaper than the Ushabti Greatbows just based on their stats here. They are kind of worse in a multitude of ways, but still, in terms of unit role, Ushabti Greatbows are unique and exceptionally powerful, so Leadlchers will be a great addition to any Ogre Kingdom's army, certainly. Maneater Pistols, again, another ranged monstrous infantry. They do pick up a few abilities here. They actually get fire while moving, which is interesting. Like the Empire Free Company militia, they can probably fire while they're advancing, which is great. We'll give them some additional utility. Other than that, they're basically the same. Again, some minor balance tweaks here and there to a couple of stats, but overall, almost identical. Moving on to the adorable felines, we've got the Saber Tusk pack, and I say adorable, they're actually horrifying looking. Like the Clever Girls, sort of like what we saw with the Khorne Fleshhounds, they have a lower model count than something like Norskin Ice Wolves, but their stats are very impressive. Non-AP damage, but 70 damage compared to only 46 for the Feral Cold ones. They've also got better charge, melee defense, melee attack, speed, only 30 armor, but it does seem like this is just a higher tier unit overall than the Feral Cold ones. Probably still around the 650 to 700 range if I had to guess, like Norskin Ice Wolves, but with less models, much more HP than Feral Cold ones as well, it must be said, so they will be quite a bit tankier than the poor Clever Girls. Definitely great fast attack, sort of light cavalry-ish type unit. Heavy cavalry though, the heaviest of heavy monstrous cavalry, Mornfangs. So this is basically Mornfangs with shield, right? Someone explained to me on my live stream the other day that Iron Fists are actually like Ogre shields, and you can see that comparison when we look at the regular Mornfangs that we have currently in game to the Iron Fists represented here. They gain an additional 10 armor and a missile block chance. They've got 38 melee defense instead of 32. The 36 melee attack versus 40 melee attack may just be a small balance change, slightly higher charge, same weapon strength, so I mean they're definitely Mornfangs, but just with a shield, so that's great. One of Mornfang's biggest downsides is taking incidental fire from especially low tier ranged units, but in general any kind of small arms fire is very damaging to them, so having a shield will be super helpful. And for another monstrous cavalry unit, we've got the Crushers with great weapons. So this is an anti-large armor piercing with even more weapon strength and charge than the Mornfangs. It seems like they'll be a higher tier of unit. Again, more weapon strength, better charge, better melee attack, less melee defense, but 120 armor, even above the Iron Fist there. So in terms of role, they'll be somewhat like what you would expect with Dragon Ogres, Demigryph Knights with Halberds, sort of your elite anti-large monstrous cavalry going after big monsters. I'm super stoked to see these guys in action. I love the models too, like the way they hold their big old great swords up in the air, just ready for a grand old time, almost like anime looking swords. That dude's got like an axe club thing. I love it. I absolutely love it. And somehow these guys are like almost up to the giant's shoulder, which is pretty impressive. Yeah, we've got a giant, folks. It's a giant. It's a giant. It's exactly the same as the giant in game. I didn't even bother to include the unit card because it's literally exactly the same, except it now has wounds and wall breaker, which I'd imagine all giants will get access to. So there you go. It's a giant. It's nice to see another unique giant model. Next up, we've got the Knoblar Scrap Launcher. I love the unit model once again for this thing, just the absolute contraption here. It technically is an artillery chariot, so again, we'll bring up the Steam Tanks card. It's faster than the Steam Tank, about half the armor and half the HP of the Steam Tank, but it is faster, not unbreakable. Less weapon strength, and the missile strength it says is non-armor piercing. I don't know how that's possible if it's lugging a shell of that size, but 420 weapon strength, so it is longer range than the Steam Tank, will give you another chariot artillery. We'll get to the monstrous artillery next, but the chariot artillery is strong in Game 3, and great to see another iteration of that. I'm not sure that weak against armor thing, that just seems a little bit strange to me, but maybe it's not final. The Stonehorn, though, is more of a monster artillery with a harpoon launcher. Reminds me quite a bit of the Stegodon, although it looks like the missile damage is significantly less and the range is shorter, but it is maybe slightly better in melee than the Stegodon, if that's even possible. Higher weapon strength, same charge bonus, less melee defense, but much better melee attacks, similar armor and leadership profile. Speed is much faster for the Stonehorn, which is an advantage for it. Also has the ability to fire while moving. I don't think that'll be added to the Stegodons, you never know, but a couple of points in favor of the Stonehorn, even though it doesn't have poison and its ranged attack isn't as damaging. I mean, the bow Stegodon's already not the most wildly useful unit in the game, so hopefully this Stonehorn's melee capabilities sort of help make up for that, but it is another long-range option for you to at least pick at your opponent with. Onto the casters now. We've got the Firebelly. Reminds me quite a bit of a Famir in many aspects. He's lighter armor, but better weapon strength, more attack-oriented profile as compared to the Famir's more defense-oriented profile, fire and magic damage instead of armor sundering and magic damage, and also has access to lower fire, obviously, which the Famir do as well. So in terms of other special abilities that are unique to the Firebelly, he's got this Fire Breath, nice breath attack, obviously deals fire damage, and 33% armor piercing, in line with what we've seen with some of the other breath attacks. Got this augment here. The Tenderizer gives himself additional 50% armor piercing and base weapon damage, which will be nice considering his pretty strong profile already. Can definitely dish out some serious pain. Flame Incarnate, plus 10 melee damage reflection. And this is another new modifier. So the damage reflected is a flat damage whenever an enemy hits this unit in melee. So basically, anytime an enemy hits this unit in melee, while they have this Flame Incarnate active, they'll take 10 damage, which isn't insane for single entities, but for multi-model units, that will be quite impactful. Eruption here, one-time use, self-explosion, does a little bit of damage and will help bail him out of danger. The rest is all just lore of fire. All pretty basic stuff, to be honest. Nice to see that Kindle Flame hasn't changed, still 20% weakness to fire, which is insanely strong. Also has this passive Rag banner here, which gives an additional plus for leadership in an area of effect, and 15% missile and 40% fire resistance, which will be really, really handy against a bunch of the new stuff and even some old stuff as well. Finally, we'll end with Scag the Slaughterer. Yes, a nice fighter, caster, hybrid, monstrous infantry lord. His stats do remind me quite a bit of Throg. He's kind of worse in every aspect than Throg, but has a casting ability to help compensate for that. This extra ingredient is his own sort of arcane conduit, gives additional power reserve, and as you may have seen in other videos, power reserve is actually a pretty rare trait to have now, and it's also permanent. The power reserve got from abilities never goes away. So this extra ingredients will be an insanely strong ability then as far as casting goes, to be able to get that extra power reserve and 160% recharge rate. Absolutely awesome. Also got Brain Gobbler. This is now the first spell from Lore of the Great Maw, minus 16 leadership on a single target. Bull Gorger on a single target of friendlies, plus 25% AP, 24 melee attack. Bone Crusher is an explosion spell, drops a fist into the ground. You'll see this in a few of the different battles upcoming. Toothcracker gives armor and missile resistance in an area of effect to friendly units. Will be super useful for ogres to have, considering they are weak in those two categories. The Maw is a giant explosion. Really looking forward to seeing this one in action. Not too much to talk about, just the fact that it'll kill everything. And then Troll Guts, a high-tier healing spell, a single target, replenishes the hit points of combatants. Nice to see ogres have some form of healing. Every time you cast a spell, this Blood Gruel passive ability for Lore of the Great Maw will heal Scag or whatever caster's casting the spell. Nice to get some additional self-healing there. It's sort of like the selfish version of the lore attribute from Lore of Life or Lore of Vampires. I actually do love it. Will help keep Scag alive. Considering his low armor, that will be quite helpful. It's also got Cauldron of the Great Maw, a passive area of effect regeneration. Only affects Gorger type units. And this is what I was talking about with the Gorger tags earlier. It's pretty important to make a note of that, because whenever they're fighting in an area around Scag, they'll get healing, they'll get extra weapon damage, and extra armor piercing damage. And each kill made by the unit will increase the intensity of this aura, increase the weapon damage portion of it. So you definitely want Gorgers fighting sort of as a bodyguard unit for Scag, which does make sense. It's also got a tiny bit of missile resistance, and that will do it for the big boys. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something. Be sure to like, subscribe if you want more Total War Warhammer 3 content. I've got battles coming out either right now or very shortly, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day. See you next time.